All right, Joe. 5.6, agricultural production region. So this one is a pretty straightforward lesson. So two things we'll be looking at. First is dividing things up, whether they are considered subsistence farming or commercial farming. And then secondly, oops, got an issue here. And then secondly, whether that's considered intensive or extensive practice. All right. And so, oops, sorry, some issues here. So anyway, and then on this that last one, intensive and extensive farming, we're going to look at something called a bid rent theory, and all that is uh, how the cost of land impacts whether something is going to be intensive or extensive farming. So let's take a look. So this is subsistence versus agriculture. So just generally speaking, when we talk about subsistence, all we're talking about is people who are producing primarily for themselves or maybe just the local community around them. Okay, a small local community. Commercial farming is that's your business. That's how you make your living. The purpose of the crop is for profit. All right, and so uh, remembering these characteristics is going to make this is going to make determining what it is pretty simple. So for the purpose again, purpose is for profit for commercial and to provide food for your family or community. Percentage of workers, if you're in a commercial industry, it's going to be a smaller percentage because you have a lot more machines to take care of that, which we'll get to in the next one. And with subsistence farming, it's generally a larger percentage of people because there's a lack of machines. And though so then we get to this third one here, percentage of machines. This is going to be the opposite. So in commercial farming, there's a whole lot of machines, and we've seen some of those in previous videos. And with subsistence, it is more reliant on manual labor. The farm size for commercial is generally going to be fairly large. In the US, the average farm size is somewhere around 400 acres. And so, again, just so you know, an acre is, if you think about a football field, that's about the size of an acre. All right, and I think if you kill off the end zones, that gets it even more. But so an acre of farmland is about the size of planting a football field, and so the average size of a commercial farm in the U.S. is 400 acres. Uh, that's a pretty big. That's 400 football fields all crammed together. So you can kind of imagine subsistence farming. You might have 1 or 2 acres. Okay, so that's a pretty significant difference, and so you can see why that would jive with, if in commercial farming you have a lot of machines that can do a lot of things really quickly, cover a lot of land very quickly, and with subsistence farming you have much smaller plots of land, and it's all people power. It's a high amount of labor, and then relationship to other businesses. In commercial, they are part of a global supply chain of a food supply chain. And we saw that in the videos about how food was being wasted with COVID. The dairy producers who were having to dump their milk, they were all commercial farmers, and they were part of that big supply chain. If they were subsistence farmers, they wouldn't have probably had that same issue because their their sales would just be to well, it would be for them, their own family, plus just this local community around them. And so, their sales aren't reliant on these big transportation networks that go across the globe that can be influenced or impacted by bigger global events. All right. So let's take a look at employment in agriculture. So you can see here the US, we employ 0.7% of our labor force in agriculture. And again, we are the world's biggest food producer. I got to double check that. It could be China, but I know we're right up there together. And so, but 0.7%, that just means that we have a lot of technology, a lot of machines, a lot of commercial farming. All right, when you look at India, 47% of their labor force, 31% in Guatemala, 74% in Mozambique. So these are more developing countries. And so generally there's this inverted relationship between the number of people in your labor force who are in agriculture and your level of development. And so you can see Mozambique would have we would assume, just based on this number, and there's always exceptions, but we would assume that they would have a pretty high, a very small level of development. All right. And so you can see a couple of these images down here. Share of the labor force employed in agriculture. And so generally the developed world, the MDCs, the most developed countries, are going to have a smaller percentage. And then again, the less developed countries, LDCs are going to have a higher percentage. This is agriculture value added per worker. All right, and so this is per individual, per farmer, how much do they generate in value, how much money. And so these make sense. These go together. If you have a small number of workers, like here in the US, and we are very productive, then they're going to have a high amount of value added per worker. And so the dark colors here means there's lots of workers, so each individual worker would produce a small amount. All right. And so these should be kind of inverted images of each other. And then you can see here, this is visualizing 150 years of US employment. And so this is 1850. I think that's 50. Old eyes. So anyway, so you can see this green area, this is the share of agriculture. And so once industrialization hit and second agricultural revolution, this number starts to go down. And so you can see where it is today. All right. And you can kind of get an idea of where the jobs are today. But we are definitely not dominated by agriculture in our labor force. All righty. And so machines in agriculture. This is what we were just talking about, productivity per worker. And so you can imagine, if you have one person here, let's say that you just had that one tractor, the productivity of that one person, imagine how much this one person in this one tractor, or with multiple machines, that person could drive, imagine how much more productive they're going to be versus somebody working by hand. Okay. And that's what we mean. So when we look at tractors per 100,000 or per 100 square kilometers of arable land, you can see the developed countries are going to have a higher percentage, higher number of tractors versus the developed countries. All right. And it does get into this idea called economies of scale. And we're going to go over that in the next section. I'm going to just hold off on that for just a bit. All right. Notice that the farm sizes have changed. The number of farms, all right, let's take a look here. Since the 60s or so right about there, the number of farms has stayed relatively constant. And so you can see they were very high in the 1920s, so it went up a lot and then it's come down. But note, average farm size is there. And then the land in farms. And so this bottom one, my pointer's not working, not going all the way down to the bottom there, but that line is relatively constant, since what, 1945, something like that, just implying that, we're farming the same amount of land, generally the same amount of land, but we're becoming much more productive per acre. So you can kind of see over here, that's not on there, but we're becoming much more productive per acre through technology, and farm consolidation has happened. So we've lost a lot of family farms, and that's something that, again, we'll talk about in future sections. So take a look, US population by region. Anyway, don't worry about that. So let's take a look at productivity. So again, we've talked about this a little bit, but here's a bit better of example to show what's going on. So this is agriculture value over here, and we've already looked at that. The per worker, the developed countries where the machinery, commercial farming is more dominant, the individual worker is going to be a lot more productive. And so you can kind of see over here, this is for the US. So take USDA is the source, US Department of Agriculture. And so you can see what's happened. So the total agricultural output is the blue line, and then this orange line, orangish line, is the total factor productivity. And by factor, they mean a unit of labor or machinery. And so this is saying that each tractor or each worker has become much more productive. All right. And down here, you see total farm inputs. This is the number of either workers or capital. Okay. And so we would have more workers down here in this area. And so as farmers dropped out, they got replaced by machines. And so this number is going to stay relatively constant. But notice that as that shift happens, the productivity of each unit of input, and by input, again, we mean either labor or machinery, that productivity is going up, which is causing the total output to go up. All right. So let's talk a little bit, this term agribusiness, you'll see this. All this is applying to commercial farming, okay? And, we're talking about, again, global supply chains, things like that. But agribusiness is where we are at in the United States today for the most part. Most of the stuff, most of the food that you buy is developed by agribusiness. All right. So, and one of the other changes that's happened is this thing called monocropping or monoculture. You'll see it either term, and that is the idea that farmers are highly specialized today. It's not that one farmer, and this is in general. Again, there are family farms that grow, lots of different things. Small market farms, but uh, generally the agriculture we see in the U.S. today and other developed countries is one farmer does one product, does one crop. All right, and there's some good and some bad for that, But if you have a corn farmer today, that's really all they're growing. It's just corn. They're not growing tomatoes and watermelons and cabbage and whatever it is. They are just focusing on one crop. They specialize in it, and specialization does a lot of really good things. It lowers costs and increases productivity, but there are some downsides. And let's take a look real quick. Some of the pros of monocropping, or again, monoculture: increased productivity and efficiency. That's a big one. Again, the idea that we are getting a whole lot more food at a very low cost. Each family today pays a much smaller percentage of their total income for food than they used to. I can't remember the number exactly. It's something like 10% today versus 20% of their income was spent on food 30 or 40 years ago, something like that. Those numbers aren't exactly right, but you get the idea. And it's because of this increased productivity and efficiency. And so, there's some good sides to this, definitely, because that money that you are now not spending on food, you can go spend it on other stuff, and that's a great thing. We all like to have more disposable income, and so that's been the focus, and that's been the direction of U.S. agriculture and agriculture in lots of different places. So. Another pro, so openness to new technologies, specialized production, and again, that specialization increases profits and reduces costs. You'll get a lot more of that in econ. It is easier to manage. You got one crop, and then there is higher revenue. There is a difference between profits and revenue. Revenue is just the money that you bring in. Profit is what you have once you've paid all your bills. All right. So they are earning more money, but they're also earning more profit. All right. There's some econ terms for you again. So there are some downsides to this, and again, there's good and bad to all of this stuff. And what's the right one? You know, it's there's always lively debates for this stuff. But here's some of the cons: pest management. Pests become more prolific in monocultures. Higher pesticide use. And we've seen that second agricultural revolution. I'm sorry, the green revolution with Norman Borlaug. He said, "Look, this is going to work great, but we need a lot of water and we need a lot of fertilizer." Okay, and so those things can cause other issues, other secondary problems that you may not originally think of in the beginning. So soil degradation and fertility loss. If you grow the same crop over and over and over again, the soil can become all the nutrients get sucked out, and so you have to figure out a way to replace them. Fertilizer use, water use, talked about that. Decrease in biodiversity. Lots of things might have used to be here, and now it's just one thing. Impact on pollinators. This is something that you may have talked about in your environmental science class, but the bee population has been going down recently, and there's the theory that it is in part, because of all of the different chemicals being used on the crops. Okay, there's a whole lot more to that, but that's just a general idea. There's something called colony collapse, and that's when a bee colony just goes away, they vanish, and they're not exactly sure what's happening. And so, if we lose the bees, we've got a pretty big problem. It would be a big problem. Anyway, sorry. Economic risks. So, what happens if something goes wrong with this crop? What happens if the demand for this crop goes away? That is one of the problems of monoculture, because if you're a farmer and that's all you do, then if the demand for that product goes away for some reason, or some kind of blight hits it, some disease hits the crop, you've got a significant problem. All right. And then finally, environmental impacts, chemicals, increased transportation. Now, this increased transportation, when they've done some studies that I've read about, when they look at, is local farming better than in terms of environment and pollution of machinery and things like that, which has a higher carbon footprint. And the studies that I've read, at least, point that the small farmer has a higher carbon footprint than these guys, than the commercial farmers. And that's just because of the efficiency of all of this. Okay. So anyway, so let's look at these two. So intensive and extensive farming practices. Again, intensive means it's going to be closer to a city for one thing, but it's more use per acre. How about that? And extensive would be farther away from the city. So let's take a look. So these are the terms that you need to be good with, identifying these four: intensive subsistence or intensive commercial, and then extensive subsistence or extensive commercial. Stops going there. So let's kind of take a look, and then we'll go over some examples. So the first one is the purpose. So the purpose of any commercial agriculture is going to be profit. All right, and this is a pretty basic one to try to determine whether this is going to be subsistence or commercial. So if it is for a local purpose, so you're just for your family or your just local community, that would be considered subsistence farming. If it is for profit, if this is what you do for a living, then that's going to be commercial. The amount of labor is another giveaway for intensive versus extensive. For misspoke there. So the amount of labor, intensive subsistence is going to be high. All right. Intensive commercial is also going to be high because we're closer into the city. Extensive subsistence, the amount of labor is low. Extensive commercial, and we're going to look at examples of all these. The amount of financial investment, that's going to be a pretty big giveaway too. Commercial is going to be high. Subsistence is going to be low. And then again, with amount of land, you can see the differences here. Intensive, let's just look at examples because that's going to be a lot easier. All right. So again, the key characteristics, you're going to look at the amount of land and the amount of labor. All right, to look at extensive versus intensive, and then subsistence versus commercial, we're going to look at the economic purpose. All right, is it for profit or not? All right. So one of the things that determines whether we do intensive or extensive farming, and remember, intensive means closer to town, and extensive is further from town. All right, and so the closer to a town you get, the land values start going up. And so if you're close to a town, you're going to try to squeeze out as much per acre as you can. And that's what intensive farming is. And so, if we have a farm, let's see if my thing will do it. So if we have a farm here that's close to town, that's going to be more intensive. As we go farther out, that's going to be more extensive because the land gets cheaper. So the bid rent theory is all about the cost of land and the proximity to the city or the town that it's closest to. And again, the closer you are to the city, the higher the land values. All right. And so if we're far away out in the country, we would consider that's going to be more extensive farming. And if we are closer in, that is going to be more intensive. So I pulled a picture here. This is Tucson. So we can see Tucson here, over here. You are here somewhere. And so if you take a look way over here, so we're going past the mountains. This is Wilcox. So we're driving for a while on I-10. All these little circles, these are farms, okay? And so you can kind of get the idea that if these farmers wanted to come in and farm up in this area, the land's going to be a lot more expensive, and so it would be more intensive agriculture. Now they're far away from a bigger city, and so that's going to be more extensive agriculture, all right? And so that's just kind of a general rule. I want to be able to show you something in practice. So again, these circles, yeah, I think we talked about that in class. All right, so let's look at some examples here. So extensive and subsistence. So the products that are being produced, so this would be, like in Mongolia maybe. And so the products being produced are not part of the global food supply chain. This is going to be for local or personal consumption. All right. This doesn't enter the global supply chain. Extensive, this is extensive because of the amount of land. And so first question, are they close to a city or far away? They're far away. That's going to put us at extensive. And the purpose of the product, this is not part of the global supply chain, so it's not commercial. And so it's going to be subsistence. All right. And that's kind of how to think about this. Take a look at this one. Again, they're out in the way open. That's beautiful. Both of those are very pretty. And so anyway, they're out in the open, so we can say that this is definitely going to be extensive. Now, what's the purpose? So this is cattle ranching. Are these cows going to become part of the food supply chain? You know, the national or international food supply chain? And the answer is yes. Okay, there's no telling where these burgers are going to end up. So anyway, so this would be an extensive commercial operation. This is for profit, all right, and part of a bigger food supply chain. All right, intensive subsistence. So now we're going to be closer in. You can notice it's going to be manual labor. So the manual labor is going to tell us that it's going to be subsistence. This is going to be smaller plots, all right? And this is going to be for individual or community consumption. So this smaller plot is going to give us the intensive part, and community consumption or individual consumption will give us the subsistence part. All right, intensive commercial. So this would be like local farms that go to farmers markets. So it's going to be smaller farms for sure. Could have 20 acres, something like that. So we might have some farms, you know, within a 50-mile radius of Tucson or a 30-mile radius of Tucson that grow multiple crops that try to sell locally. All right, it is more expensive land because it is close to the city. A lot of times you see a lot of more organic stuff, but this is for profit because they're taking it to the farmers market. They're not, you know, doing this just for themselves or those directly around them. But so anyway, so this would be an intensive and commercial. And then finally, dairy farming is actually going to be, it's a little bit closer to the city. And we'll look at some reasons for that later. But that's going to be intensive, all right? And it's going to be commercial. So commercial, obviously, this is going to be part of a much bigger supply chain. And it's going to be intensive because of the high amount of labor. Obviously, there's a lot of machines here too, but all right, so that's intensive and commercial. All righty, we will leave it there. That's 5.6. Y'all take care.